Thousands of Cuban citizens take to the streets, speaking out against the country's communist regime. Many are losing their internet connections amid the protests, and some suspect China is behind it. Beijing seems to have a new friend knocking on its door, the Taliban. A spokesman says they are hoping for talks with Beijing and promise to keep Chinese investments in Afghanistan secure. Could nuclear war erupt between China and Japan? A prominent Chinese military channel says that's what the future holds if Japan defends Taiwan, and the U.S. could be involved too. And Beijing is stepping up its crackdown on China's version of Uber. Now 25 apps are set to be removed from the App Store. It's part of a series of control measures reining in China's internet giants. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Thousands of Cubans took to the streets over the weekend, speaking out against the communist regime. This as the country struggles with food shortages and an economic crisis. President Biden and U.S. lawmakers expressed their support for the Cuban people on Monday.
President Biden addressed the situation in Cuba Monday afternoon.
The Cuban people demanding their freedom from an authoritarian regime. And I don't think we've seen anything like this protest in a long, long time, if quite frankly ever. The United States stands firmly with the people of Cuba as they assert their universal rights. And we call on the government of Cuba to refrain from violence or attempts to silence the voice of the people of Cuba.
Biden said the Cuba protests are remarkable. In an earlier statement on Monday, he also called on the Cuban regime to hear their people and serve their needs. The White House has been closely monitoring the protests in the country. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned against targeting of peaceful protesters who are exercising their universal rights. Protests in Cuba erupted on Sunday, with thousands taking to the streets across the country. It comes amid food and medicine shortages, rising prices, along with the CCP virus crisis. But Cuba's leader blamed the United States for the unrest. In capital city Havana, protesters chanted "Freedom, enough, and join" as the police arrived. The police launched tear gas and violently arrested people. The internet service was cut off by the authorities throughout Sunday afternoon. Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez, said in a statement on Sunday, "The world's eyes are on Cuba tonight, and the dictatorship must understand we will not tolerate the use of brute force to silence the aspirations of the Cuban people." Senator Marco Rubio, who is of Cuban descent, says Cubans are rising up because they want freedom.
They're tired of living under tyranny, and they're tired of living under incompetent leaders. That's what the Cuban regime is. Because socialism and Marxism doesn't work. It's a failure. It's a failure everywhere it's been tried, and it's having a catastrophic impact on the people of Cuba.
And Senator Ted Cruz, the son of a Cuban immigrant, also tweeted his support. He says the communist Cuban regime will be consigned to the dustbin of history, and the American people stand squarely with the men and women of Cuba and their noble fight for liberty. Some analysts say Sunday's demonstrations were the biggest in Cuba since 1994.
Many Cuban citizens are losing their internet connection. Amid large-scale protests across the country's communist regime, local authorities are reportedly shutting down internet service. Authoritarian regimes tend to cut off internet in an attempt to stop anti-government protests from gaining more traction. Similar shutdowns struck earlier this year when pro-democracy protests broke out in Burma or Myanmar. Now, some suspect that China is behind Cuba's internet censorship. Florida Senator Marco Rubio wrote on Twitter that Cubans use a system that was made, sold, and installed by China to control and block access to the internet. What's more, the only company in Cuba that provides internet access has 3 primary tech providers, and all of them are Chinese. The U.S. Defense Department has labeled 2 of them, Huawei and ZTE, as having links to the Chinese military. China leads the world in internet restriction tactics. It's developed a sophisticated system called the Great Firewall that blocks its citizens from visiting websites critical of the Chinese regime. The Taliban says it sees China as its friend and hopes to talk with Beijing as soon as possible. While U.S. troops are pulling out from Afghanistan, the Taliban is inviting Beijing for reconstructions and investments and guarantees to ensure its safety.
The Taliban says it sees China as a friend and promises Chinese investments in Afghanistan are secure. Media reports say the Taliban is now hoping for talks with Beijing. A Taliban spokesperson said they had been to China many times and have good relations with them, calling China a friendly country and welcoming it for reconstruction and developing Afghanistan. The United Nations has condemned the Taliban for supporting terrorism and providing weapons used to train terrorists. The Taliban's remarks come amid a withdrawal of U.S. troops. American forces have fought in Afghanistan for 20 years. President Biden pledged to withdraw all U.S. troops by September 11th of this year.
I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
But China seems to have something to say about the plan. China's foreign ministry posted a related notice late last month. It urged Chinese citizens to leave Afghanistan as soon as possible due to what is called severe and complex security concerns. China already evacuated more than 200 of its nationals from Afghanistan by charter flight this week. But as the situation in Afghanistan changes, so has Beijing's rhetoric. For years, China has blamed the U.S. for what it considers interfering in internal affairs. But early this month, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi started accusing the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan of being irresponsible. He says Americans are walking away from the region. Days later, in a press conference, China's foreign ministry spokesman reiterated the blame, saying the withdrawal amounts to hypocrisy.
Is China threatening Japan with nuclear war? A prominent online Chinese military channel is proposing a nuclear attack on Japan. That's after Japan said that it may defend Taiwan if the Chinese regime invades the island. The military channel posted a video on Saturday. It says if Japan sends a single military unit to intervene in a Chinese takeover of Taiwan, Beijing will respond with an all-out war, and it will start with nuclear strikes on Japan. The channel adds that Beijing will repeatedly fire nuclear warheads until Japan surrenders. The video has since received over 2 million views, with the vast majority of Chinese comments supporting the strategy. It's not clear if the channel is directly linked to the Chinese military, but given China's strict online regulatory system, the video likely could not have been released without the consent of Chinese authorities. A nuclear attack on Japan is not without consequences. In 1964, China announced a policy saying it will not fire nuclear weapons on any country unless that country fires first. If China fires nuclear warheads on Japan, it would violate this policy. What's more, Japan and the U.S. have a mutual defense treaty. An attack on Japan is equivalent to an attack on the U.S., and the U.S. will respond using its full range of capabilities, including nuclear. The U.S.'s nuclear capabilities is multiple times more powerful than China's. As of 2020, the U.S. has nearly 4,000 active nuclear warheads, whereas China only has around 350. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken issued a statement on the 6th anniversary of the 709 crackdown in China. He is urging Beijing to release the human rights lawyers and activists who have been unjustly detained or imprisoned as part of the crackdown.
In the statement, Secretary Blinken calls on China to release those who have been detained or imprisoned in connection to the 709 crackdown, to ensure their family members are free of harassment, and to reinstate the lawyers who were disbarred. He says those people being targeted by the Chinese authorities are simply trying to pursue legal redress for their fellow citizens, but Beijing tried to intimidate and silence them. During that crackdown on July 9, 2015, more than 300 human rights lawyers and activists were unjustly detained, interrogated, and imprisoned by the Chinese regime. Some are still imprisoned and persecuted. The statement mentions 4 attorneys still being detained by the regime. This Friday also marks the 5th Chinese Human Rights Lawyers' Day. Some lawmakers, rights attorneys, and activists from different countries joined an online event discussing the difficult situation for human rights lawyers in China. Congressman Chris Smith talked specifically about lawyer Gao Zhisheng. He disappeared and was held for over 50 days by authorities in September 2007, after writing an open letter to the U.S. Congress exposing human rights abuses in China.
Policemen covered his head with a black mask and took him into a room where they stripped him naked and beat him. They used electric batons to shock him all over his body. Sadly, that abuse continues, we believe, to this day.
Smith said he looks forward to the day when tyranny is replaced with justice of the rule of the law. The event organizer also gave this year's China Human Rights Lawyer Award to Chang Weiping and Ding Jiaxi. Both are still being held by the police.
Coming up, Beijing is stepping up the crackdown on China's version of Uber, DiDi. Authorities notified app stores to remove DiDi's 25 apps. This is part of a series of control measures against China's internet giants. More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
China's cyberspace authorities are asking app stores to remove 25 apps by ride-hailing giant DiDi. The company confirmed the news on Monday, admitting that this could impact its revenue in the region. DiDi said in a statement, the Cyberspace Administration of China notified app stores to take down these apps and cease to provide viewing and downloading service in China, and require the company to strictly comply with relevant laws and regulations and rectify the problem to ensure the security of users' personal information. Chinese authorities have been stepping up their crackdown on the company. Beijing launched a probe into the company earlier this month. It was just days after DiDi's $4.4 billion listing on the New York stock market. Authorities asked it to stop registering new users, citing national security and the public interest. The communist regime launched investigations last year to regulate the country's internet giants. Earlier this year, Chinese regulators gave Jack Ma's Alibaba a record fine of $2.8 billion for its anti-monopoly violations. Over the weekend, Beijing banned two big live streaming platforms from merging due to an antitrust investigation. The entire city of Beijing has come to a standstill. Hundreds of flights were canceled and schools were shut as the city faced the biggest storm of the year on Sunday. Around 15,000 people were evacuated from their homes. Downpours along with strong winds caused floods, halted public bus lines, and forced tour sites to close. Beijing authorities have issued a stay-at-home order for everyone on Monday, and they asked companies to let employees work from home. Heavy rains also caused trouble in other Chinese cities. Videos circulating online show floodwater sweeping away people and cars in a city of 9 million. It's in Hebei province, which borders Beijing. The flood has submerged parts of the city, blocking roads and sewage pipes. More extreme weather conditions are expected in the coming days. On Monday, Chinese authorities issued a yellow warning for strong rainfall across the country. That's the third highest in their 4-level warning system. Authorities in Beijing said accumulated rainfall since Sunday is expected to reach 2.3 to 4 inches on average. That's about 1/6 of the city's annual rainfall. And in southwestern China's Sichuan province, heavy rains drenched many areas over the weekend. More than a dozen rivers exceeded the flood warning level. Over 700,000 people have suffered from the flood, with a direct economic loss of over $330 million. That's according to Chinese state-run media. NTD cannot independently verify these figures. Online videos show the floodwater overflowing a dam, forming a waterfall over 30 feet. About a dozen ships were engulfed by the running water and got swept downstream. Some witnesses said the ships were crushed into pieces instantly. After the river overflowed the banks, it soaked the first floors of some nearby buildings. Residents are spotted paddling on boats on the streets. Cars parked by the curbs are also floating like boats. On Sunday, 80% of a local town was submerged in water. Some buildings there had as many as 2 floors soaked in water. 8,000 people had to be evacuated. The value of Chinese companies trading in the U.S. market is plummeting. It's likely a result of Beijing's regulatory crackdown on Chinese tech companies. The change has sent an index of U.S.-traded Chinese stocks to its lowest mark in over a year. The index is called the S&P BNY Mellon China Select ADR Index. It tracks 56 Chinese companies trading in the U.S. Online shopping giant Alibaba is its most valuable member. But the index is down 36% from its record high in February. The Chinese regime's latest move against its tech sector is a probe into rideshare company DiDi. Beijing says it's adding restrictions for companies selling shares overseas. A senior portfolio manager told the Wall Street Journal the Chinese regime's new rules could restrict future listings, but he's not sure how it would affect Chinese companies already listed in the U.S. Lithuania is bolstering its ties with Taiwan and distancing itself from communist China. The Baltic nation has recently announced plans to open an office in Taiwan and to quit a forum led by China.
Lithuania, an EU member state bordering Russia, seems to be growing more skeptical of Beijing and more sympathetic to Taiwan and Hong Kong. Earlier this month, Lithuania announced plans to open a trade representation office in Taiwan this year. The move angered Beijing, which claims the democratic island as its territory, despite having never ruled it. Few countries have official embassies in Taiwan. Instead, several EU countries host representative and trade offices on the island. The Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to the move, saying they firmly oppose all forms of official agencies in Taiwan. Meanwhile, Taiwan is thanking Lithuania for its support. There has been a surge in goodwill between the two sides. Lithuania has sent to Taiwan 20,000 doses of CCP virus vaccines, and Taiwan returned the favor with donations. Taiwan also gave Lithuania 100,000 surgical face masks last year. In a separate move, Lithuania also quit a multilateral forum led by China. The so-called 17+1 group took shape in 2012 to deepen China's ties with Eastern Europe. But the program has fueled concerns in Western Europe. Many fear Beijing is seeking to divide the continent. Lithuania has asked other EU members to follow and step out of the pact as well. And the country has done more than that. It has also designated the Chinese regime's abuses against Uyghurs as genocide. Beijing dismisses the claims as outright lies. In regard to Hong Kong, Lithuania may offer more opportunities for people there thinking about leaving. That's as many Hong Kong residents face increasing political pressure due to Beijing's sweeping national security law. Hong Kong media Stand News reported that Lithuania is considering offering simplified immigration procedures for Hong Kong residents. It may happen in the near future. Beijing doesn't seem to be happy about Lithuania's recent moves. Chinese state-owned media Global Times is saying as such a small country, Lithuania is inviting big trouble.
An animated film depicting Beijing's human rights abuses has won big in film awards in Canada. It tells a moving story of a 5-year-old Chinese girl whose mother was killed as a result of the CCP's modern-day religious persecutions. NTD's Donma has more.
Peabody Award-winning director Leon Lee's recent film depicting the Chinese Communist Party's modern-day persecutions is earning a myriad of honors. His film Ragdoll won Best Animation, Best Art Direction, Best Screenwriting, and Best Direction Animation at British Columbia, Canada's prestigious annual Leo Film Awards. The film has also been selected for 4 Oscar-qualifying film festivals, including the LA Shorts International Film Festival and Holly Shorts Film Festival. It tells a heart-wrenching story of a 5-year-old Chinese girl whose mother was killed by the Chinese regime, all because of her faith. What was your inspiration for making this film?
I've been making films about human rights issues in China for a long time, and I happened to meet some young orphans who escaped from China. They were victimized because their parents were prisoners of conscience in China. Some children were expelled from school, some became homeless, some were even tortured. The majority of the scenes depicted in this film are based on real-life events, are based on the interviews I had with orphans from China. So without giving too much away about the film, that's essentially the story.
In your film, you portray the traumatic events of this one girl. Has what happened to her happened to other children in China?
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, there is no official statistics to tell us how many children were orphaned because their parents were prisoners of conscience. But through various reports and different years, the number is quite large. We know in the persecution of Falun Gong, for example, millions of people have been affected.
Falun Gong is a spiritual meditation practice. The Chinese Communist Party launched a brutal persecution campaign against it in 1999, despite its widespread popularity in the country before that.
3, 2, 1, flash!
Lee says he chose stop motion for his film because what the orphans experienced would have been too hard for viewers to watch in live action. He says Ragdoll tries to portray the hardships that the orphan had to suffer.
Of course, no matter how we try to portray this, it's nothing compared to the horrific situations that are experienced by the victims in China. I had also interviewed children who were detained by the police, who were forced to work in the labor camp.
Can you tell me more about the main character, the orphan girl in the film?
Ragdoll is based on real-life events, based on the stories I heard from multiple people. Among them is Luna, who lost her mother due to the persecution of Falun Gong. We have an interactive article about Luna on our website, ragdollfilm.com, which tells in detail her experience.
Lee says for those who love stop animation, they should definitely check out this film. It's currently free to watch on YouTube. The film director is also a Peabody Award winner for his 2014 documentary titled Human Harvest. The film exposes China's organ harvesting industry. Could you also talk a little bit about your 2014 Peabody winning film?
Sure. Human Harvest was a documentary 8 years in the making. It exposes the horrific forced organ harvesting practice in China, mainly targeting Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetans, and Uyghurs. But recently, they've expanded. I think lots of prisoners of conscience are now subject to forced organ harvesting in China. There has also been a mountain of evidence that surfaced after the release of the film. So at this point, there's no dispute, I can say, that the forced organ harvesting is happening in China. The only question remains is what should we do to stop it?
Lee is currently working on his next film titled Unsilenced. It's about media censorship in China, and it's eyeing a release this fall. Don Mang, NTD News.
Thailand's health ministry said on Sunday more than 600 medical workers who received 2 doses of China's Sinovac vaccine have been infected with COVID-19. Brian Wood reports.
Officials say that hundreds of medical workers in Thailand have been infected with COVID-19, even after receiving 2 doses of China's Sinovac vaccine. On Sunday, the country's health ministry said that over 600 of the nearly 700,000 medical personnel who've been fully vaccinated with Sinovac were infected between April and July. Boon Vanasan is the chairman of a Thai healthcare group. He compared Sinovac to other vaccines, like European-made AstraZeneca, and said China's jab is not as effective against the quickly spreading Delta variant.
Here, there were 5 medical staff infected with COVID-19, and 2 were admitted to the ICU. This means Sinovac can't protect people from the virus, and the symptoms will be severe compared to those who got the AstraZeneca. It shows that people who were infected with the Delta variant after receiving the Sinovac vaccine can have symptoms as severe as people who haven't received any vaccine at all.
An expert panel has recommended a 3rd dose to trigger immunity for medical workers at risk, according to senior health official Sapan Lamsithawan. He told press on Sunday AstraZeneca or an mRNA vaccine will be made available, quote, in the near term. Thailand is expecting a donation of 1.5 million Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines from the U.S. later this month. Neighboring Indonesia, which has also heavily relied on Sinovac, said on Friday it would give the Moderna vaccine as boosters to medical workers.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, be sure to check out our latest special report. During the Cold War, nuclear arms were at the heart of the U.S.-Soviet Union race.
Just by being there, these weapons deter others from aggression and thereby serve the cause of peace.
Today, the struggle between democracy and communism continues, but the focus has switched from nuclear arms to something much smaller, microchips.
It has dramatically enhanced the Chinese Communist Party's military capabilities, and it is now enough a threat for the United States.
Containing Beijing's rise in the chip industry,
it's like pulling out Beijing's sharpest teeth.
But with U.S. and China deeply intertwined.
It's hard to hurt China without hurting ourselves.
In part 2 of the special report, risks that could make America vulnerable and what we are doing to fix them. Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV. China in Focus is partnering with the platform. That's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. To subscribe, click epochtv.com/China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.